Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for Seeds Have Spirit with Scott Chaskey. Scott Chaskey is a poet, farmer, educator, and author of Seed Time, and he also has another book he's working on right now called Soil and Spirit. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott.
Thank you, Ariel. And am I heard? Good. Everyone can hear me? Yeah. Okay. So very nice to be here. Well, I was going to say with you, sort of. I actually going back, remembering when COVID first visited us, I was scheduled to give an in-person reading at Conio's bookstore in Sag Harbor. And they said, oh, we're not doing that anymore. Can you do Zoom? And I said, oh my gosh, I don't know about that. And I did. And now I've done it many times. So here we are on Zoom. Nice to be with you in this way. And I saw two names right in the beginning, Erica and Hope. So really lovely to have you with us. And maybe there's, and they're waving. And so maybe there's some other friends who'll be on as well. So my plan was that I would read a little bit from my book Seed Time, just to start things off, and then show you a few books that influenced the writing of that book. And then I'm going to actually show you some seeds that might be a little bit silly on Zoom, but we'll see if I can hold up some seeds that you can see. If I was there, obviously, I would be passing around some seeds, because there's nothing better than to be holding in your hands, what we're talking about. But this is another way of doing it. So, and then really my desire is that, we can all talk about your experience with seeds. I know I have some things to learn from a couple of you, and we can tell our seed stories, and you can ask questions. So I want that to be sort of, the whole, ending part of the Zoom. So I'm going to read from Seed Time. This book came out maybe, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. It's called Seed Time: On the History, Husbandry, Politics, and Promise of Seeds, and has a wonderful cover. Does this work? Can you actually see that? I hold that up like that?
Yep, it's a little dark, but we can see it.
Yeah, okay. So that seed is a milkweed. And this was taken by a good friend, Mia Bowling, who lives in the Springs. And here's a wonderful, everything I'm going to say is about, how seeds are on the wing, how they take off and how they get transported from one place to another, either by animals or humans or the wind, or, all different. They're very adaptable seeds. So here's a wonderful story. The book I'm writing now is called Soil and Spirit, and I've been working on it for the last couple of years. It's going to be published by Milkweed Editions, a wonderful not-for-profit press that's been operating for 40 years in Minneapolis. And when they first got back to me about wanting to possibly publish this book, I said, do you know what was on the cover of my last book? And the answer was no. Well, a milkweed seed. So that's how seeds work. So anyhow, I'm going to read a little bit from Seed Time, from the prologue. Here we go. Seeds are often given wings to assist their journey and to ensure another generation. It took several 100 million years or more to move from the birth of a single cell to the evolution of seed cones to the formation of seeds, and yet we now take for granted this magnificent dispersal, the language of transport of the plant kingdom, as if it were simply a mechanical inevitability rather than a mysterious gift of time. When the wings of a maple seed take off on the wind, or the cotton wings of a milkweed seed break from the pod to fly for another patch of soil. It is as if a word goes forth, an original phrase, but also an echo of an ancient earthly melody. The life force within a seed is equal to the force within a word poised for articulation. It draws the poet inside. Just as the memory held within each seed is activated and responds to light and the changing temperature of the seasons, when I write, I can feel the first breath of a melodic line before it is nourished into expression. The germination of a seed is speech given substance. One of the smallest seeds we have in our farm larder is also one of the most useful and graceful, clover. Of this vibrant legume, the Buddhist teacher Robert Aitken says, "Clover does not think about responsibility. Clover simply puts down roots and puts up leaves and flowers. It comes forth, and its response to circumstances is to give nourishment." So that's a bit from the prologue, and now I'm going to skip the whole middle part of the book, which I hope you may read. I'm going to go to the afterword because of the echo of the clover. I began this book with an observation made by Carrie Fowler more than 20 years ago. We are in the midst of a mass extinction event in agriculture, and the trend that promotes monocultures and economic consolidation has only intensified in the ensuing years. In 1985, in his book, Altered Harvest, Agriculture, Genetics, and the Fate of the World's Food Supply, Jack Doyle wrote this: "The genetic centralization of food production is something to worry about. The stuff of national sustenance is involved, the sustaining essential ingredients of life, the most basic components of food making. These are the food determinants at the innermost sanctum of biology. Indeed, these are the ingredients of power. These genes that command the faculty of chloroplasts to bottle the sun so we can have food. They are, in their workings, the closest of a kind to anything we dare call sacrosanct. We owe them more respect than to patent their trade. The health of our fields, the health of our plant communities, and the future of our food supply will depend on whether, as a global culture, we can learn to respect the whole of the biological community and to accept our role as citizens of it, and to honor those who still retain the connection." I like the example of clover. I went out today to inspect the autumn crops, those we will harvest into December: cauliflower, broccoli, kale, and collards, and those we will harvest for the winter share to be stored in the root cellar: turnips, radish, rutabaga, and carrots. In the adjacent field, where we harvested wheat in July, the flowers of red clover dominate the green blanket that covers the silt loam. After the wheat harvest, I mowed the chaff that remained, and the clover, sown 2 years ago and at home in the shadow of the wheat, was stimulated by this increased access to the light. It is a beautiful plant. 3 heart-shaped leaves delicately streaked with a whitish V, and at the end of an 18-inch stem, hundreds of purple-red flower whorls holding the space for a seed. It is the tiniest seed we plant, hardly visible in the center of your palm, yet it is responsible for the most significant contribution to field fertility. Having germinated in the shade of the wheat, the delicate white flowers of campion complete the natural bouquet of the field. Our culture, our habitation in this time on earth, is in need of transformation, some say in the shape of a new story. Transformation comes from within, and seeds have mastered the art. Clover does not think about responsibility. Its response is to altered circumstances, is to give nourishment. I have sown the seeds of clover and seen it come to flower in the fields, and I have tasted the harvest of nutritious food the following season. May we continue to cultivate our fields with the imperishable mystery in mind, and to playfully carefully follow these seeds and nurture them where they desire to go. So that's the last bit from seed time. And for those, I guess I made an assumption that everyone on this would know that I farmed at Quail Hill Farm, just behind the library there, in the fields behind the library, for 30 years. But maybe not. Anyhow, working for the Peconic Land Trust, and we were actually the first CSA, Community Supported Agriculture Farm in New York State. And part of what became an extraordinary movement, if you want to use that word, and now there's an estimate that there are something like 12,000 or more CSAs in the country. And we never, I met with the first few people in the country in a little tiny Waldorf school in Kimberton, Pennsylvania, and there were 25 people the first year, and then there were 50 people, and then there were 100 people, and it just kept growing, and no one had any clue of, you know, where it would go. And certainly not that, you know, 30 years later, there would be an international conference held in China, of all places. And there's an organization based in France, Urgency, they're called, who support this international community farming movement. And I've been to conferences in Portugal, in Thessaloniki, Greece, and in China as well. All people practicing community supported agriculture on every continent. Really extraordinary. And anyhow, that's the background. I should say something about my present ground, which is that I graduated from, that's my wife's word, from Quail Hill a couple of years ago, just before COVID arrived. And the folks at Quail Hill are kind enough to give me a little garden in the back of one of the fields. So I still have my hands in the soil, and I'm working on this Chinese medicinal herb garden, which I'll speak more about, and I'll talk about those seeds. A project that we started in 2003. It was the brainchild of a woman named Jean Giblet, who has a place in the Hudson Valley and called High Falls Gardens, and she was very involved in Chinese medicinal herbs and in growing them, and got the idea that this could help other farms in New York State to get into that. She included us in this. She got a grant. She included us in that year, 2003, and that we were one of 5 farms in New York to start growing these herbs. And it started with really just a few plants. The thing was, I also had to grow lots of radishes and tomatoes and potatoes and all that sort of thing for all the community farm members. And the medicinal herbs were in a back field and they got forgotten about. But now I get to tend that garden, and it's grown a lot. And there are maybe about 35 different species of these herbs, and they're teaching me. So it's a really wonderful project. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But at the moment, I'm going to show you, I know this isn't going to work on Zoom, but there's a few books that I think are sort of essential if you really want to get into learning more about seeds. I'm in my study where you can see some books behind me, but I'm surrounded by books on all sides. And now I'm reading a lot about trees because that's what I'm writing about in this new book, but I have a whole section up there devoted to seeds. This is one of the best ones, and it's just called Seeds, Time Capsules of Life. Looks like this. And it's worth it for, if you need to discover the miracle of seeds, here it is, because the photographs are extraordinary. Maybe I can show you just a page from the inside. Looks like that. not really doing it justice, but you get an idea from that. And it's the work of a fellow named Wolfgang Stuppy, who's the seed morphologist at Kew Gardens in London. And it's a really extraordinary book. Here's one of my favorites. This one by Donald Culross Peattie, really a wonderful writer. It's called Flowering Earth. And you know, it has the story of the beginning of the seed revolution, which was the angiosperms 140 million years ago. Here's a great book by my good friend Gary Paul Naban, and if you've never heard of him, he's written 25 books or so. This is really a great book. It's called Where Our Food Comes From, and he traces the path of Nikolai Vavilov, who was one of the great Russian plant explorers who brought back something like 200,000 different samples from 5 different continents. Extraordinary man. And the story gives you an idea of the amazing history of where our food comes from. So that's Gary Paul Naban. That's that one. And one more. This is really like a show and tell thing here. I know it's a little odd, but anyhow, I love books, and well, this is a library event, so you all love books, right? This one is called The Seed Underground, A Growing Revolution to Save Food, by another friend of mine named Janice Ray. The Seed Underground. And so actually at the, there's a section in the back of my book, Seed Time, of sources, and I'm pretty sure you have a copy of that, Ariel. I think, yeah, you must have a copy, because I actually gave a reading there at the library when it first came out. So there's a section there which includes all kinds of things, but lots of books about seeds. So I'm always up for encouraging people to read more about a subject that they have some affection for. So now I am going to show you some seeds. We'll see how this works. But, you know, the whole thing is every seed has a story, and that's a good place to begin. And so there are going to be a few stories here. Let's see if you can see this. This is part of this. Maybe if I just hold this up. This seed is actually an angelica seed. A really neat plant that can grow 7 feet tall or something like that. Well, there's no way you're going to see that. There you go. You can see something like that. This jar comes from one angelica plant. That's a lot of seed, and this is what seeds are good at: reproducing, right, and spreading themselves around. The angelica plant happens to be in the Chinese medicinal herb garden, and I have to look up in my book what the angelica root is used for as a cure. But anyhow, there's a wonderful book about that, which I'll tell you about. So that's angelica. What do we got here? This one is called Seminole, and it's a pumpkin, or a winter squash, that was given to me by Janice Ray, who wrote the book called The Seed Underground, and it was her favorite. So she lives in Georgia, and she's been saving this seed for a really long time. And we met actually at a sort of a seed think tank session in Virginia at a place called Oak Spring Gardens, which I recommend that you look up. It was the home of Bunny Mellon, and it's now been turned into a place for further study about plants. It's an extraordinary place in Upperville, Virginia. And Janice Ray gave me these seeds. I've now grown them out for, I think, 3 years. And all you need to do is save the seed from one pumpkin, and you've got enough to give away to all your friends. And they are delicious. So that's a wonderful thing. So another way for seeds to spread Now, here's my favorite one and my favorite story. Let's see what you can see with this. I don't think you're going to get you're not going to really get the effect of the color of this. So this is called the shinnecock bean. And this is now my third year maybe of growing out the shinnecock. So, and it's my favorite story. I attended a winter conference hosted by NOFA New York in Syracuse. That's the Northeast Organic Farming Association in Syracuse a few years ago. And there's a great seed saver, a woman who lives in Binghamton, and she loves beans. So she actually is the keeper, a seed keeper of 1,000 varieties of beans. That seems extraordinary to me, right? So she lays out all her beans in front of them, and I was looking, and this one caught my eye, and she said, "This is the shinnecock bean." And I said, "Well, I know shinnencocks. That's where I live, and my kids went to school with shinnencocks, and I would love to have some of those." And she said, "They're yours." So I brought them back here. I think this was right when COVID arrived, and I said, "Okay, I'm just going to grow them out myself for a year." And the next year, I called up Shane Weeks, my friend at Shinnecock Reservation, and I said, "Look, I've got these beans that I picked up in Syracuse, and they're supposedly shinnecock beans." And he said, "Is it cranberry colored?" And I said, "Yes, it's cranberry colored." He said, "I've been looking for those for many years." And so, as it turns out, Lisa, who's the woman who I got them from, had been given them by a fellow whose name escapes me at the moment, but he's of Cherokee descent, and he's known as a really great seed saver, lives in Kentucky. He gave them to Lisa. Lisa grew them out in Binghamton. I got them from Lisa, brought them back here, and gave them to Shane, who is now growing them on the Shinnecock Reservation. It's the first time that they have been there for 100 years. This is part of the miracle of seeds. They were given to the fellow in Kentucky, his grandfather. He's third generation seed saver. They were given to him by his grandfather, who got them from a fisherman from Long Island, who obviously got them from someone on the Shinnecock Reservation. And now Shane is growing them out there. Really wonderful. And so a number of us are growing them now so that we can really keep them in circulation. Here's another one. Here's another story. I think I'll tell this one. This one is in the Chinese herb garden, and it's called Bellamcandra, or commonly blackberry lily. And this was part of the first group of plants that Jean brought to us way back in 2003. And she brought one plant. Now, they're very easy to save seeds from. It varies, and we can talk about this, of how easy or difficult it is to save seeds. But it's a black seed that looks like, oh, you're not, oh, maybe you can see that. Yeah, you can see that. That's the size it is, right? So you can't actually hold it, because some seeds, like the clover, are so tiny, there's no way you'd even be able to see it. Anyhow, from that one plant, I saved seeds, and it's so pretty. It's this orange colored lily that grows up about 2 feet tall, and it flowers for a very long time. And then it holds the seeds in the pods throughout the winter, actually, sometimes. So some plants you have to harvest the seed at a particular time. This one is easy to do. And now I keep handing them out all over the place. And I have 25 plants or something like that. One year at the farm, we grew a row of about 200 plants because they're so pretty, and they come up every year, so they're perennials. And anyhow, I've got a lot more of these. So I'm going to tell you now that I'm I told Ariel that I would bring some of these Chinese medicinal herb seeds to the seed library in Amagansett. And I'm so thrilled that Ariel's got this going. And apparently it's going very well. So I'm going to contribute to that. And any of you who, have any desire to grow any of these, the seeds are going to be there in the Amagansett Seed Library. So that's kind of my story, about seeds right now. And I'd like to open it up and hear what other people are growing or what questions other people have. And I'll do my best to answer any of those questions. So let's just talk.
I just allowed it. So if anyone wants to unmute, you can unmute now if you have a question. I mean, I have questions, but I want to let someone else go first if they have one.
I think actually this is good because I think I'm supposed to have a date to meet Erica out there sometime, and now we'll have to make a date.
Hi, Scott. I'm Francine, and I actually have a couple of questions, but let me not, hold other people up. One question I have I've always wondered about, how do I know when a seed has passed the point of viability? Because I tend to forget seeds that are still around. And I mean, is it different for every kind of plant and vegetable and fruit, whatever? Or is there kind of a rule of thumb that you can use?
Yeah, I wish I could say there was a rule of thumb, but there isn't.
There isn't.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
it's very different. And I don't know why, it's just whatever the plant world has thought up for itself. But for instance, the onion family, the alliums, they don't keep it all.
They don't.
And, we've tried, I mean, I learned this through, okay, we don't want to, it was a significant expenditure every year for the farm. And we saved some seeds, but we really bought most of them in. And it took years to figure out, okay, these are the ones that, we've got left over from last year, so they'll work. And the ones that didn't work were the alliums right away, and the brassicas. Brassicas are hard to save. The easiest, the ones that will last the longest are tomatoes, for instance, as long as they're stored well. So that's a really important part of it. And I was kind of slow to learn that it really, so if you copied the way, professional seed savers do it, what you want is, a very cold environment and dry. You want to avoid moisture of any. So people might think, okay, I'm going to put them in the basement, but it's too humid, especially in this climate, in the basement. So that's not a good place. And what I do now is I keep them in the fridge, in packets like this, but the packets are in a plastic container. So the fridge would not be a good place if you were just going to put the packet in there. But if you put them in a plastic container and then take them out, you can try them. And you would probably have luck with tomatoes, maybe even 5 years later. Certainly, certainly 3 years. But I don't know if people have heard of the Svalbard seed bank, which is above the Arctic Circle in part of Norway. That seed bank is, under in permafrost. It's under the ground. So, they're frozen. And the thing is, it's tricky because no one really knows how long that will last. So at some point, all the seeds that are even kept in, scientifically proven exact conditions have to be brought out and revived again by growing the plants and saving the seed again. So it's a tricky thing. And, the thing is, I think you just experiment, you try saving a few seeds and you do it the way I said, in the fridge, in a plastic container, and then try them, and see what they're like the next year. And it really does vary with almost every particular seed.
But would you say that using them the following year or buying them fresh every year? I mean, I'm trying to save my own seeds too. So I just wonder if I save them and tried the method that you just described to us, I would probably have pretty good success the following spring when I
Oh yeah,
plant
yeah.
them.
1 year later with almost everything except alliums and
Allium.
brassicas.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think if there's another one. The other, of course, that's one of the factors. Now, here's the thing: when you get talking about plants and growing things, is one of the ways our farm operated was through apprentices. So I had apprentices for 30 years,
Mhm.
and they would ask me, there'd be a problem with this or a problem with that, and they would say, well, looking for wisdom, they would say, oh, what is that? What caused that? And I say, I don't know. I don't know. There's
Yeah,
too many factors.
right,
So
right.
that's part of it. But the
Part of
other
the
thing,
magic.
it is part of the magic. That is part of the magic.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that, if you saving them and you
Mhm.
want to, that's great. So, you're saving the seeds and you bring them out in the spring, you can try germinating them to see if they're germinate, in wet paper towel. You
Right.
put them in wet paper towel and keep it
Right.
wet. And if it
Right.
germinates, there you go. You've got it. So you don't have to use all your seeds and plant them all in a tray or something like that. You can
Right, right.
test germinate them basically.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah,
you.
sure.
Anyone else? I mean, I can also kick it off with my question. So I've never saved seeds. So for me, my question is, what is an easy thing to save? Like if you've never saved seeds before, what's like a good plant to start with?
Well, I probably tomatoes for one thing, because everyone likes growing tomatoes, and it's an interesting process with tomatoes. So you'll find this anywhere in you can look up seed saving and or just Google tomatoes and how to save or something like that. And they have to go through a fermentation process, which is what would normally happen when the seed fell into the soil. It would ferment in the soil and sprout the next year. So it's very simple though. And when you have the tomato, you get rid of or eat most of the tomato, and you run the seeds to get rid of the surrounding glob around the seeds, and then you put it in a dish and let it mold over. You like maybe put a wet cloth over it or something like that. Let it mold over for like 3 days or something like that, so it goes through the fermenting process, and then you rinse it again, and then you dry it out. And so you're learning through the whole thing, because you have to handle the seeds a number of times, and I think that's a good thing. And then of course most everyone loves tomatoes. So if you do that and you're successful and you say, wow, I grew this tomato plant. Other than that, the other thing I would say is, if squash seeds are large, so the size of the seed matters. So it's very hard it's harder to save the tiny seeds. But if you're dealing with a squash or something like that, but you have to make sure it's an open pollinated. So I should have mentioned this, of course, somewhere along the line, but you cannot really save, well, you can, it can be done, but it's not easy to save seeds from hybrid plants, because they're bred every year. They're bred again. They're an inbred phenomenon. And if you save seeds from them, it won't come true. So because it's two inbred lines that are crossed, and it's only good for one generation, whereas open pollinated seeds are very different. And so you want to only save open pollinated plants, and that should be listed on any seed packet. And hopefully that's part of what all seed savers would learn, because the open pollinated varieties are the ones that are vanishing, and many have gone, and they're the ones that need to be saved. And that's part of what this sort of seed saving revolution is about, is people bringing back the plants that have been lost for generations, sort of like this Shinnecock bean, really.
I think that story was my favorite from
Yeah,
today. It was
that's a good one. It's a beautiful bean too.
Uh-huh.
Just beautiful. And it has all these variations. It's really cranberry colored, and then it's sometimes streaked with it's a cranberry streak, sort of white, and then sometimes the cranberry dominates and has white streaks. And that's partially because it's been passed around and grown in different places and everything. And what people who grow plants professionally want is they don't want that. They don't want the variation. But if you're growing for taste and for the beauty of the seed, the variation is wonderful. Yeah.
Sorry, it looked like Erica was going to say something.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you, Scott. I am looking forward to visiting with you in the Chinese herb garden this year.
Wonderful.
Definitely.
Wonderful.
And I also, and thank you for sharing, your philosophy on seeds. It's such an amazing, fascinating subject. But I also have a question.
Okay.
I've been trying to seed clover in over a section of a lawn that's been way problematic for me.
Mm.
And when is a good time to sow clover? I've tried different times of the year. They come up, and then all of a sudden the clover disappears.
Mm.
What am I doing wrong?
Well, you may not be. They missed the other grasses. You're doing it in a place where there's some other established grasses.
Well, right now there's nothing, and then crabgrass takes over.
Yeah, I mean, they get out competed. I think that's one of the problems, and crabgrass is a problem that way. But the best chance you have is, so in the farming community, we did something called frost seeding. So I would never have guessed this when I, got into farming, but the best time to sow clover was in March. Before, yeah, like really early. And what we would do, and we had lots of success with this, is you basically rake the ground, and obviously at that time of year nothing's happening, right? The clover is such a tiny seed, it has to have a groove to fall into. So you rake the ground, and it will germinate and get ahead of the other grasses. So that is your best chance. And I mean, it works on agricultural fields. Sometimes those things don't translate into smaller gardens, but that's how we did it. And it's a natural term. I mean, if any farmer would read about this frost seeding, and it specifically works. So it doesn't work for other grasses, but it works for clover.
Right. Makes sense. So I'm a little late this year. It's already April.
Yeah, it's it's sort of the end of April, so it is a little late, but you could still try it. I mean, you know what our springs are like. I mean, it was 40 degrees the other night.
Right, it's been sort of chilly, so
it's been chilly, so it's worth a try. But
I will. Thank you.
It's really better to do it in March. Yeah, when there is still some frost, which seems counterintuitive to me, but it works. I've seen it work.
It works.
Yeah, we did it. We just as an anecdote, in the early years before we had equipment to do this, Paul Hamilton was working at Quail Hill at the time. This would have been in the early 1990s, and the section on Town Lane to the north of Town Lane, a little bit further east from where the Balsam farm stand is, there's that big open field there. And at that time, there was no fencing or anything. And Paul and I, seeded by hand with like a spinner, 30 acres or something like that. We walked for I think it was 2 days. We were spinning on the clover. That's how you learn about seeds.
Wow.
And it worked. Yeah, and maybe then a couple of years later, when we had, a spinner, so that you're driving with the tractor, it, took an hour. But we were younger and we, didn't have to go to the gym at the end of the
No, no, you certainly didn't.
day.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for coming.
Wouldn't miss it. Always enjoy just hearing your voice.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and your poetry.
Oh, thank you.
So-
Yeah, I'm working on it. This book, I'm very close. I'm on the last chapter of this book that I've been
Wow.
working on for a while. So yeah, it's a nice time when you get there and you're just kind of wrapping it up.
So when do you expect it to be published?
Well, weirdly enough, it takes from when the completed manuscript is submitted, it's a year from then, which seems
Wow.
kind of weird. It doesn't take that long to print it, but
Yeah.
the publisher wants to make sure that, everything's ready when it comes out and the publicity is, in action and all that kind of thing. So it'll be out next spring.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you. It's an interesting job, because I really, it was time, the timing was right to, give up full-time farming. And what I wanted to do was write, but it's so different than being out in the fields and planting things. And I love my study. I've spent a lot of time here for the last couple of years.
But do you miss being out in the fields?
Well,
Planting?
having this herb garden is
Yeah,
terrific.
you
It's-
are out.
Yeah, I'm out in that, and it's really it's just a joy to actually learn from the plants, because there are different kinds of pressures, and the thing is, we entered into this Chinese medicinal herb project because I admired what she was doing and seemed like a nice possibility for the farm. But then there was always this pressure, like, oh, the weeds are growing over them, we can't get to them in time, and tried to interest apprentices, but they didn't want to go out there at the end of working all day on other plants, so
Mhm.
now I get to be the one that tends them. So really, really nice.
It sounds wonderful, and I am really honestly I can't wait to
Okay.
meet you there.
Yeah. So the plants are just coming up.
Right,
And
it's
so
it's early.
it's early still, and that's,
And where do these Chinese herbs, where do they come from? Where did you where
Well,
where
some
did
of
they
them,
originate?
well, some of them came originally from China, and then there's a couple. There's a network in the country of growers. It's not a huge network. You find out, like, when we first were involved with CSAs, that was a very small network that kept growing, and maybe this will happen. But the reason that Jean Giblette got involved in it is because she found out there were something like 20,000 practitioners in the country who were all ordering their herbs from China, but they're not terribly hard to grow, and they don't need a very particular soil or anything like that. And so she said, well, why can't we grow them here? Why can't we set up a distribution network in this country? And so it has been operating for a while. There's a wonderful grower who's written the kind of Bible about growing the plants. And she's in California. Her name is Peg Schaefer. It's a beautiful book. Peg Schaefer, maybe growing or Oriental plants. No, that's not quite right. Anyhow, her name's Peg Schaefer. And then there's another significant garden in Virginia. And now there's a pretty significant group of growers in New York State as well. And it's not at that stage yet. For instance, it's sort of mine is an experimental garden. I'm saving the seeds and monitoring the plants and all that sort of thing, but we haven't even begun to dig the roots, which are usually the medicinal part. And this autumn, I think we're probably going to start digging some of the roots, which then we'll get, because she's just started to set up a distribution network. So it's a
Wow.
very slow process, but it's, it's lovely. And
course.
so some of the seeds came, this is, well, I should have mentioned this when you asked. Some of them came from the Arnold Arboretum
Really?
yeah, in Boston, because
Yeah.
there's a beautiful Chinese garden there. And some of those plants originally, obviously came from China. And Jean has a special license to go and collect seeds at the Arnold Arboretum. Yeah. So I'm thrilled about that I'm actually
Yeah,
growing these plants that started at the Arnold. Yeah.
that's amazing. Yeah, I know they have, this amazing collections of trees. I don't remember, and we've been there with the Alliance. I don't remember the Chinese garden, but
I remember it being kind of tucked away. I was only there once. It was sort of up on a hill. And so that's the thing. What the ones that came from the Arnold are trees. So I have things like Angelica and this lily, another kind of lily, things like that. But I actually have a number of trees, which oh gosh, I don't know, they're getting quite large now. We'll see what happens to my little garden. But one of them is a Sichuan pepper, which is a fascinating sort
wow.
of bush. Another one is what's the name of it? I'm forgetting the Latin name, but it's a rubber tree, and the medicinal part is actually the bark. You actually shave the bark from the tree, and those trees can grow 50 feet tall. And I don't know what happens when they get to that stage. And another one is liquid amber, sweet gum.
Right?
Yeah, and I have a number of beautiful sweet gum there, gorgeous, sort of, those amber colored leaves. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Oh, fascinating. I can't wait.
Okay, coming up.
I will.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks, Erica.
Um,
Any other questions?
You can also ask in the chat too, if you don't want to be recorded. I'm
Okay.
if there's a
Hi.
secret.
Yeah, I have some thoughts and some questions. When I first joined Quail Hill, after I bought my house here, I spoke to my sister about it, and they live in the countryside up in northern Lancashire, close to the Lake District, and they had just bought 5 acres, and this old house, they were renovating the house. And because of our conversation about Quail Hill and everything, my sister started to create a garden, in organic food gardens. And it just sort of magically turned into a CSA.
Wow.
And they started spinning off and all through sort of northern Lancashire and the Lake District, all of these, they've just taken off,
That's great.
And what you were talking about was very reassuring. The sort of the obstinacy of seeds,
Good word.
the determination of seeds,
Yeah.
to fulfill themselves.
Right.
And there's so much anxiety right now about global farming and Monsanto and so on. And so this conversation gives me a lot of hope.
Oh, good.
About, what we can do globally going forward. And just sort of realistically looking at what's happening on the planet and where we're going.
Yeah.
This obstinacy of seeds seems to be, it's very reassuring, there's a lot of despair occurring on the planet. And so this idea that seeds have such a persistent and obstinate kind of determination,
Right.
is just, it's a lovely idea, you know.
Yeah. So another good word is tenacity. I was
Absolutely.
I was
Yeah.
thrilled when you know, when my book Seed Time came out.
Yeah.
Someone, I wasn't responsible for the index. That's a job of the index person, whoever it is. I never met the person, whatever.
Yeah.
But under T, the first word was tenacity of farmers. And I loved that.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
seeds have that. And
Yeah.
it can be, you know, so I actually, I lived in England for 10 years. And I wrote a book called This Common Ground, and it
Uh-huh.
tells the story
Yeah.
of learning to
In,
garden
in Cornwall, right?
in Cornwall.
That's a very tough place to farm.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was on these cliff meadows, all done all done by hand. Yeah, it was an interesting way. Well, I guess if you can garden in a place like that, then you can garden anywhere.
Amagansett Loam is a piece of cake.
Quite literally. Yeah, I got definitely spoiled by the Amagansett Loam.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I went back, and just at the time when CSAs were coming to England. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And this was some years ago. This is probably, oh gosh, at least 10 years ago. And someone passed on my name to the Soil Association. And they brought me up to Bristol to talk at the Soil Association, which I'd always been, you know, I had always honored what the work that they were doing. And, you know, living in England and having the support of Prince Charles, you know, for, you know, organic agriculture was extraordinary. So being there was really quite a privilege. And there I was coming back to the place where I'd learned to garden to advise people on beginning CSAs. It was quite an amazing experience, really. Yeah, so I'm so glad to hear that it's taking off there too.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah,
quite considerably. Yeah,
that's so great. The whole thing of community agriculture, it just keeps spreading out. So it's one thing when, you know, one, you know, group of people create a farm, and, you know, and then that spreads out and everything, but that leads to other people learning that style and joining in creating a community seed bank and all that sort of thing. And it's just the best. We need that kind of news.
Yeah. And, you know, we tend to think of seeds as very fragile.
Yes.
And from what you're saying today, it's very reassuring. They're not fragile at all, actually.
No, I mean, you know, they know how to endure, and they have so much to teach us. Here's a lovely thing that I've included this. The book I'm writing now is quite different, but I've included one little section because I admire this so much about seeds. And there's a group of Native Americans who are now spreading this around the entire country. And so there's a network of indigenous seed keepers, and they use this word rematriation. And I just love this. So I've written something about this process, and it's bringing back seeds to the place where they originated, to a place of origin. And sometime, and this is actually indigenous people who sometimes, you know, a grandmother or a great grandmother, it was always the women who were saving the seeds, has saved this particular squash or this particular corn or whatever it is. And there was one story where the main variety of corn that had fed an entire tribe, nation, was down to one cob of corn, and you know, and it's revived, and now it's spread all around. And the idea is that if the ancestry of those people were fed on this particular variety of corn, then
that's
the people should be fed on that as well.
Yes.
And, you know, there's so many health problems that have to do with eating
Yes.
things that nobody should be eating. And
Yeah.
so this word is so beautiful, rematriation. So
New,
it's,
a new mothering, rematriation.
yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. And it's the total opposite really of repatriation, you
Yes.
know, and it's, and another great part of it is that some of those seeds which originated in indigenous communities were actually saved in like the US National Seed Bank,
Yeah.
and or kept by families. And there's a really wonderful place anyone interested in seed should know about. It's called the Seed Savers Exchange in Iowa, and they exist to actually link people up to spread seeds. And they have a yearbook where you can connect with other people if you want a particular type of tomato or something like that. And it's not, they just print it, and when you want to connect with someone, you connect through this, you know, this encyclopedia basically, and then you directly receive that seed from that other person.
Nice.
And it has something like 15,000 varieties of plants. It's extraordinary thing.
Well, you know, the reality that sort of is revealed here is that our health and life literally lies in the soil.
That's very true. That's very true. That's what kept me farming for all those years. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Ariel, do we have time for one, for at least my question, or if not others? One more
I think we could do one more if that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
I just wondered, Scott, if you could give us a little update on the milkweed situation. I know that in the years gone by, you've really made an effort to plant a lot of milkweed for the butterflies, and I wondered how it's going.
Yeah, well, so we didn't actually even have to plant it because it was there, and
It
all
was
you
there,
had to,
yeah,
you know,
yeah. Oh, I thought you made more of an effort to get the seeds out.
Well, our effort was to not farm there anymore, and then so
Okay.
along Deep Lane,
Okay.
the great
Okay.
section where milkweed is like along, and you'll see along Deep Lane, and
Yeah.
it, you know, happened by chance really, but it's actually my favorite field at Quail Hill now. Is that for 20 years we farmed right along Deep Lane because that made most sense, and people could drive, you know, and park right along the road and then get out and just harvest their own crops. But when we put up the deer fence, we didn't want to put it right along the road, so we moved it back up the hill, and that left this 4-acre area, which all we did was leave it and mow it once a year, so that if you didn't mow it, it would be cedar trees and locusts that would dominate, and they would come up. But if you mow it once a year, the smaller plants like milkweed will just flourish, and that's exactly what happened. So when I would take people on tours or something, I would say, well, you know, we have some nice tomatoes up here, and there's a nice potato field over here, some beautiful flowers, but this is my favorite field where the milkweed is flourishing. And that's what has to happen in more places. So I know that, you know, I'm really glad you asked that question, because, you know, it's a pretty big deal. You know, the monarch population apparently has declined by 97%. In other words, from what it once was, there's 3% of the monarch population still in existence. And that largely doesn't have much to do with the East Coast. It really has to do with the chemicals that are used in the breadbasket, and where, you know, the main flight path is from Mexico up to Canada. And I don't know if everybody knows about the story, but just reading about those butterflies, that it takes 6 generations. So if you really think about it, okay, well, they start off in Mexico, that's where they overwinter, and they travel up to Canada, and they travel back again. But the ones that come back are the 6th generation, and somehow in their DNA, they know where to go. It's so extraordinary. And then leave it to Homo sapiens to destroy their habitat. So more fields like what we you know left at Quail Hill is exactly what's needed all over the country, really.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
Yeah, well, thank you
so
for
glad
bringing
you
that up.
did that. So glad. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And you'll notice, I mean, I do remember when we first started at Quail Hill, I remember, in the autumn, there would be, the migration was noticeable. I mean, and
Oh, yeah.
some years it was phenomenal. And you'd go along the ocean and there'd be like,
You'd watch them.
streams
Yes,
of
streams
monarchs.
of butterflies.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
You
really
know, I don't
beautiful.
see them anymore. I'm so
No,
heartbroken.
You know, you can still see them
yeah,
um, just at the end of the summer, just small
yeah,
groups of them going
All
back.
groups,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at the ocean, you can see them. Yeah.
Well, thanks to people like you, Scott, you know.
Oh,
who
thank
do
you.
that.
My friend Gary Paul Nabon started an organization called Make Way for Monarchs, and he linked up with farmers because he figured, okay, they're the ones who can actually allow milkweed to grow in their fields or plant more if they
Yeah,
needed
yeah.
to or something like that. So it's
Oh, that's great.
yeah, Make Way for
Yeah.
Monarchs.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you for the whole talk. It was terrific.
Oh, thank you
I
for
enjoyed
this.
it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott. I know Scott mentioned our seed library. So hopefully we'll have some seeds from him within the next few weeks if you stop by. We do have seeds left, but certain things are gone. Like I think mint is gone. There's a few, oregano's gone, but there's a lot of other things that you can come get at the library if you want. And it's when you come in right on that side entrance, it's in the old card catalog. You'll see it. It's kind of right in your face. But thank you so much, Scott.
Yeah, nice to be with you all.
And next week we do have, this one won't be recorded, so if you're interested, it's next week at 6. We have Gardening with Deer from Cornell, because I know in Amagansett that's definitely a thing. So if deer are a problem, you might get some wisdom from them. So, and that's Zoom also, so that's just online on our calendar. And we definitely do have Scott's book, Seed Time. I checked just to make sure it didn't walk off with someone because I loved it so much, but it is still there. It's on the shelf.
Great.
So, yep.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah, nice
Thanks,
to be with
Ariel.
you. Thank you for
Thank you.
listening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.